Hi, my name is Nils, co-founder of Dingy Studio. As both a seasoned web developer and UI designer with deep expertise in the web platform and modern design tools, I bridge the critical gap between design and development while leading our fully remote digital strategy team, helping organizations create sustainable solutions that transform user experiences into business success, especially as AI reshapes how we interact with technology. And today I have a very exciting episode coming up. We want to look at the intersection of UX design and compliance. So we've all heard about all of the new European acts coming into play. So I think everybody heard about GDPR that has been with us for a couple of years now. And so the two new recent additions are for artificial intelligence and accessibility. And the EU has started to put out acts that need to be implemented by the countries. The one that is going to come into effect this year is the European Accessibility Act by June of this year. And the next one that is not much after it is the European AI Act that in fact came into or is going to come into effect tomorrow at the time of this recording. So after beginning of February, all the countries in the European Union have time to implement this into their local law. To talk about all of this and to talk about the implications of more compliance in software development and how we can make better software products, I have with me today Steffi Besselink. She's a GDPR contract and AI lawyer. She just recently acquired a very challenging, specialized certification to be an AI lawyer in Europe. And I'm excited to talk to her about all of this. So let's welcome Steffi Besselink. Steffi, can you say like a couple words about yourself and also about your recent certification in AI law, for example?
Yeah, that was very exciting for you. I know you really like that. So I've been for a few years now in GDPR. I got into the field a few years after it, shortly after it launched in the EU back in 2019. In the meantime, I've always been doing contracts. So this was more of a expertise in the field. And I have recently last year, not sure if you're familiar with that, but all privacy professionals, lawyers, security people, etc., they are able to obtain a certification from the so-called IAPP organization, which is a worldwide, global, incredibly highly valued organization that provides exams and certifications in how to apply different privacy laws, such as GDPR, but also there is US privacy certification, Brazil, I think a new one was China. They launched last year also the IAGP, it's called the AIGP, of course.
Yeah.
The AI certification. And I passed, yay!
Amazing.
Yeah, it was, as LinkedIn has been, as Matley put it was quite challenging. It was a very difficult exam. So I was also very excited that I passed, studied quite hard for it as well, but still happy that that has been a success and stop.
Yeah, very cool.
Now, yeah. Yeah. So that now I'm getting further into the AI as well. And what that means is, of course, we have the EU AI Act that officially starts tomorrow. 1st of February.
Oh, really?
With non-prohibit. Yes. So everything that is not allowed AI, such as, for example, social scoring AI, that is like type of the Black Mirror AI, right? Like the AI that is trying to score you as a person. We all remember this episode, I think, where it's scoring a person based on its social connections and to see if it could have a mortgage in a very nice area, this kind of things. Yeah, that kind of AI, not allowed. So all of the prohibited AI should be off at least if you had it on the market, take it off.
Yeah.
So that starts tomorrow, and then it has a longer implementation date for high risk and other type of AIs. So that's where I'm getting into slowly, because of course we're having some time for implementation, such as documentation around the high risk AI. So we are getting that time. Then there's also contracts to consider, like copyrights that is coming out of AI, especially because Europe and US have still different approaches towards that, like to who belongs to copyright, who's responsible for output, What's your
Hmm.
liabilities around the AI that you put on the market and a regular website visitor is using it. So these kind of things, getting into it on the side of my GDPR business, where I still help companies dealing with data protection questions such as,
Yes.
do I need consent or can I use legitimate interest for processing this data? Like going back to the basics.
And for that stuff, I love to have you on the show because maybe this is only my perspective, but possibly there are more people out there who just have a hard time grasping what certain laws really mean, what are the implications on business activities in the end. And so in this podcast, we speak a lot about how a better user experience can have a positive impact on your business in the end. Like we speak about topics like where should you apply research to know exactly what you're building so you don't have to kind of do the classical thing where you just on a hunch or on whoever thinks they know best define a feature, build it, and then in the end realize, oh, this is maybe only half of what my users actually wanted. So we have to go and remake this now. And my co-founder Daniel, for example, posted this blog post the other day that talked about how expensive it is to do an accessibility audit after the fact. So what it's essentially saying is you're making something and then after it's done and finished and online and rolled out and all of the things, you start to audit for the accessibility of the feature. And it's like going to the doctor. Of course, you will find something. Of course, if it's not designed for it, it will have flaws. And thus, it starts same as with general good UX design and knowing what your target audience wants. It starts this insanely expensive process of kind of remaking the feature. And so this entire story is something that I'd love to have a discussion with you about today and for our listeners to learn about what it actually means or could mean for building software and selling that, especially in the EU, with the dawn of AI acts, GDPR, accessibility acts, like all of these things, I think everybody heard about a lot last year. What does this mean for everyone? And to get there, maybe you can tell us a little bit about your experiences from, I don't know if it's the field of GDPR, but you told me before the session that compliance is just often an afterthought. And so this is where the idea for this podcast episode came from, that how can we integrate this better?
Well, how to integrate it better? I think that's the $1 million question in general for every
Yeah.
software in DPO.
We don't have to start with that.
We're still working on that solution.
Yeah.
But the funny thing that just occurred to me when you spoke about how also your business, like Dinky, the entire team is trying to teach and educate companies on the value of a great planning, right? Like if you do your market research beforehand, if you understand who your customer is and what they want, you save on actual costs later for going back and changing it. Now, that's the same, and that's a great plan. I suspect every parent will teach that to its kids. Try to first think about what you're going to do before you start finishing your homework. So that's exactly what we need to do all the time. And if we get there, I'm sure like also management wants to do that. It's just that the checklist before becomes very large, right? Like what to check and what's the plan and what do the customer wants and why we have this feature and what's the, at some point it's like, do we really need it? What are the costs to actually do the market research? Because we're paying people time to even do the research beforehand without even know if we need it. So there's so many aspects and so many teams before something is starting that just arise from a good idea. Like I have an idea and someone actually put time in it to think about a problem. And then there is compliance. So compliance is asked before often with like, can we do it? Which is like, people want a short and quick answer. They don't want you to start doing the research yet because that's a lot of expensive hours. We first just like, is there a possibility?
Yeah.
So
if we
That is
roughly want to do this, do you
correct.
think this might be
Yes.
okay?
Yeah.
Can we make this work, sort of?
Could we make this work?
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Could we make this work? Well, naturally, the answer is rarely no, because if you do it well, you can make a lot of things work. So what happens is like, yes, but think about yada, yada, yada. That often happens, not all the time. Actually, a lot of times it's also that you're entirely forgotten. Your Department of Compliance and Law is entirely forgotten. Everything is made. You arrive at the product. Oh, it's going to be a launch next week. Steffi, can you check this very quick?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, but
And
we
I'm
laugh
like,
about this. But
yes,
this is
but
not
that's a
only
serious
legal stuff.
problem.
I think
If
this
I,
happens so often.
yeah,
Really.
and the
Yeah.
serious problem is when I start to ask the question, what are you going to collect? What do you want to use it for?
Mm.
So if you want to use it for example, sharing purposes, do you what's your goal here of the data that you want to collect? You need to get this right in order to make your data an asset. Otherwise, you're going to lose it because if you don't ask it right, you will not have a valid consent. You can't even use it. You have to re-ask consent. It's expensive. If you don't have the right consents and paperwork, you may not even be able to share it. So where are you going to collect it? What's the setup of your business? What are your affiliates, etc.
Yeah.
It goes really deep. And if you have, it's
All
like,
of the questions you want to be asked a week before your launch.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Or there have been cases where data subject rights have not been respected, or like, there's a little tiny button that actually didn't really work. So if someone was to click on the button, like I want to exercise my data subject right, which of course authorities do to check, they love to do this kind of exercise, like, oh, let's see if this form works.
Yeah.
Um,
And then it doesn't work.
and then it doesn't work. Yeah, or
Then
like
they're like,
just
aha,
aha,
let's
it's
dig
actually
deeper.
yeah. Well, already that is like phew, fine. It's like
Hmm.
not compliant because you are not able to give a person the right information and give access to it to exercise its data subject rights. So it's some things are sound simple and they are, and they just need to work. There's
Yeah.
really no discussion about it if you launch it. So there are some things that just have to be checked, and that can be in a way like a checklist. And it would be great if that with the design
Yeah.
comes together.
Exactly.
Have
Yeah.
been, yeah, instead of like companies have been fined for deceptive patterns or dark patterns, or like the button
Hmm.
was too small or the colors did not make sense for a person to, so there was no informing,
Yeah.
right? Like it's like to be clearly informed means you need to do some sort of an effort to understand, like, okay, this is the information you need. If you put the letters in white on a white background or light gray,
It's obviously a deceptive pattern. Yeah,
correct,
totally.
yes,
Hey, and
you can
so
say I did it, but
before we discuss more on how, because I agree, like especially for business owners listening, trying to understand what it will take to basically run a successful software development project in the coming years. I think the length of the list of things that you have to pay attention to increases just to very daunting lengths. So I can absolutely, like, I'm with you. Like, this is not the premise of you have to do these 1 million things and only that way you will be successful. But on the other hand, it's just very clear that we have to adapt our process of making software to incorporate all of these factors one way or the other. But before we get into that, maybe let's zoom out a little bit and just talk for a couple of minutes about the last couple of years. Like when GDPR was the first thing, I think, that was a bit of a paradigm shift for digital products in Europe in general, right? Like that for me was the first time as someone building websites where I had the feeling that this just comes very close even to our relatively small business, and it has direct implications of what we can do. Like before, everything felt like cowboy land and you can just do stuff on the internet. And then with this, Europe started to put out regulations for all these sorts of things that were just previously not regulated in any way. And a lot of other industries, I think, always looked at what happened on the internet and were like, why do they get to do whatever they want? And we have regulations all over the place, right? And so from your experience, looking back at the last couple of years, like GDPR being the first one, then introduction of Accessibility Act, and now the newest one with AI. What would you say, like just from a pace perspective, and also from how big the implications were on software companies in Europe during the last 5 years, something like that, just to get a feel of what this actually means, what we're talking about?
I do think it's heavily regulated for companies, for sure. There's a lot of things to consider. There are a lot of acts to consider. Sometimes they overlap and it went in a very high pace. So even law firms need entire teams to catch up on each other. They work all together to make sure everything in every act and every law, especially if you're having an enterprise, is being covered. It's challenging, yeah, for sure. And that's why the biggest corporations have also been fined a lot. Sometimes it feels it was more of a hunt for certain monopolies. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. For certain monopolies coming to Europe, taking over a market. And I have the feeling it's there are two ways around it. So one is with the personal data. I think there is definitely something from EU. The feeling of privacy is very high in Europe in general, and that comes and it stems from history already, right? Like we've had certain heavy wars. So if we go back quite a bit, those wars have left a mark in all of the cultures, and especially the European Union and why it exists as a European Union. And the right for privacy has always been a right that was a fundamental right. Like everyone has the right for its Article 8, the fundamental principle, like the right to have privacy and family life. So, you will not be prosecuted for whichever. And with big tech being able to obtain so much data and create entire profiles around you, you lose that right in a way, right? Like you will give in. So I do think that Europe had this idea about it. Now, if you look from an economic point of view, Europe was definitely one of the first, right, to start with these laws, but certainly not the last. Other countries are following. So yes, you can say US, for example, that is still struggling with many of the laws and like has very compartmentalized regulations. Some states have high data protection laws, strict regimes. Others are very like, whoa, all good.
Like California, right? Like they're pretty high.
They are pretty, yeah, but California is not the only one. So there are also other states that are quite, that can have quite strict data breach notifications, for example, that can even be more strict than California. So it's the US is not that far behind. It's just unknown.
Yeah.
And then
it just seems like it. Yeah.
Seems like it because there's a very big mouth on the AI part, right? Like right now, it feels like Europe has EU AI Act and US companies are racing to create AGI, the artificial general intelligence doesn't exist yet, but will be operating like a person, which is super scary for legal and ethical people.
Yes, I think it's generally, like, I tried to get a grasp on the definition of what even constitutes an AGI. And I loved what I found. Like there was this amazing interview from Y Combinator, for example, who just got their 15 top CEOs from the tech companies that they founded, and every single one of them had a different definition of an AGI. And it ranged from "we have it already" to "we will never have it."
No, we don't have it. It doesn't exist yet, but we have something that comes close. So what we have now is weak AI or normal AI, only AI that generates text or generates an output based on on a manual or a human input, right? We have to give it a prompt in order for it to work.
Yeah.
An AGI would mean it doesn't need the prompt.
It
It
just
would be
does stuff. It
it does
exists on
stuff
its own, so to say.
based on what you and I think we needs to be done today. That AI does it already because, well, it's raining. Let's get out the umbrellas.
Yeah.
So like
Yeah,
it
yeah.
makes decisions, so to say, like a human does.
Mm.
And the difficult part, like if you listen to experts that are really into the scene of the technology of it, is that if we can make an AGI that completely thinks on its own, because now we do have like a complex AI, right? Like we have something that looks like it, because of course we have the in California you see that a lot, the self-driving cars,
Yeah.
and they consist of a lot of parts of AI itself, but the AI itself has to make a choice, like am I going or not? It's orange. Am I going or not?
Yeah.
We were in California this year, like a few months back, and we saw many of those driving around. They have like this big round
On the top. Yeah, yeah, totally.
incredibly exciting, because all the time you are looking like, is there someone in the front of the car? No, it's completely making the decision by itself. And then you drive next to it and you're like, it's orange. Shall we go? Shall we go?
Yeah.
And especially in the US, where you can take a right turn without, when the traffic light is on red,
Yeah.
right? So, but you can still take a
Freaks me
right
out
turn.
every time we're
And
there.
I'm with you there. I'm with you.
It just feels
Coming
so
then back
wrong.
to Europe, it's like I need to stop now. I need to.
Exactly.
And you're looking at this car. You're seeing these people in the back, like turning like on their phone, like, yeah, no, I'm all super cool in this self-driving thing.
Yeah.
And you see this car taking decisions, like firm decisions, like we have here in Finland. We have the little robots that provide the groceries from the store, and they have to, well, so to say, drive themselves. Like they have to go over the street. They wait for the
Yeah.
zebra crossing
Yeah.
forever. They wait forever.
Really?
I always feel like they're never going to make it. They wait and wait. And it's like, and you see this little, it's a very cute little tiny, like tiny box robot with a few sensors and like, beep, 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 beep.
Yeah.
So it's like, it's not going to go far.
Yeah.
I feel like these groceries never going to arrive. It's going to expire.
Ice cream melted. Stuff went bad.
Done. Well, it's still Finland. Your ice cream may stay the same. Fridge
Yeah.
or outside, but
Fair.
but in summer, definitely don't get ice cream via the robot. In US, the I can see why people think we have AGI. This vehicle self-driving makes decisions. It, like, I can go now, and there's a car, because it calculates distance from where the last vehicle is coming.
Yeah.
And if you can
And
make a turn,
a million
it
things.
has
Yeah.
a million things at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And so I can see why people still think, but it's still a connection of loose AIs working together.
Yeah.
It's not AGI. It's a loose connections working together. If we have what experts say, the scary part of AGI, if we have AGI, then it will not be very difficult to create the last form, which is super artificial intelligence, that is superb, that is wiser, that is beyond the human capacity of understanding. And that is, that's the futuristic movies probably.
Exactly. We
No
had
one
so
really
many
knows how
movies
that
about
looks
that.
like.
Yeah.
Correct. And no one really knows what that looks like. So it's, the whole thing with AI is like, we were for a very long time, they call it the winter. We had a few summers and we had a few winters, and we were for a long time in the winter where it didn't move, right? Like ChatGPT wasn't there. We just had small components that worked. And then suddenly we had this boom again.
Yeah.
And now it's like, are we going to the second boom of like creating an AGI? Do we want that? Well, EU was before like, well, we are going to have legislation to make sure we can control it. US is not there yet. US has right now a bit of more complications with what legislation to follow and set up right now with the new government. Then there's China. So they're rushing together.
Yeah.
So basically, the world is in pieces and no one knows where we're going to end up.
Exactly. And I think this is also, even from my perspective, as a fellow business owner, we all are, right? Every entrepreneur on the planet must be looking at all of this and just wondering if you're at all somewhere connected to building digital products. At least this is where we're coming from. I'm looking at all of this and I'm like, how are we
What's
going to
my
sort this
role?
out? Like
Yeah.
what does this all of this mean, you know?
And where do you belong in this big puzzle? I guess like
Exactly.
everything is a little bit crazy right now. I think
Yes.
I feel definitely I'm with you. There's a huge divide as well. If you so I'm also a bit into different worlds, right? Like I'm
Mm.
in the world with Dingy, like other entrepreneurs. I'm having customers that are smaller, having customers that are bigger, having customers that are more conservative, having customers that have to abide by other health laws, clinics. I'm in a university setting as well, and you see these different worlds, and there is a huge divide in people embracing the new world, so to say, the new tools. People that have read about it and are like, yeah, let's see. I can try
Okay.
some. Yeah, some have tried some things. Some have never tried. Don't even see the point of why. Why did she try it? I spoke with one of my oldest friends, is a elementary school teacher,
Mm.
and she called me. She said, "Have you heard? There is a tool that it's called ChatGPT, and I and I type in something, and my entire plan came out. My entire activities, everything. I was like, I know, girl, you're gonna have so much holidays right now because all of your work will be. They do a lot of like brain creativity work for kids, and
Yeah.
chat was helping them out
But
massively
it's,
with.
you know, it's easy to make fun about that. But if we remember, this was like 2 years ago. Like that was when before, like what, like 2.5 years before Christmas, when ChatGPT came out and everybody had this moment, sorta, right? Like it was the single, how did they put it? Like I think they measured it in how many new users in 24 hours or something. And it outpaced everything we had seen before. YouTube, TikTok, anything, nothing had as much of an adoption in the first weeks as ChatGPT has. And still, it's only 2 years back, right? Like this explosion, so to say. And we have many customers looking to integrate some sort of AI application. Like you cannot go to any convention of medium-sized companies in Germany or even startups or anyone basically without the topic coming up. And so I think rightfully there's the question of how can we utilize this to get better in our business? What will this even mean going forward? Like, so with the background of a UI designer, for example, the entire industry of UI designers is looking at AI and is questioning if they will even have a job next year. Like, there's all of these uncertainties in various dimensions, and I think for people who run their own website or even, I don't know, have a SaaS platform where they're building features and so on. Getting back to the long list of stuff that you have to pay attention to. One thing is clear, I think, that the way that we make software features has to change, like not only from a compliance perspective, also just from a UX perspective, even like for us, it's absolutely certain that we just won't continue building websites that have forms with a button on it for all eternity, because that's just not how humans are going to be interacting with computers now that we at least have been shown the possibility that you can just talk to it. And it doesn't, like, there is something between yes and no. There's a maybe now. And there was never a maybe before. Like, when you tried to fill out a form, it either you did it right and it let you submit the form, or it said you did something wrong at whatever field. And it was more or less helpful. You know, sometimes I think we all tried to book a flight somewhere and it just said no, and you couldn't figure out why, because it was just like designed in a very bad way. But so going, like my mom, for example, told me that her huge excitement about Siri was that, and Siri, like the Siri from a couple years ago, she just never could get along with the fact that on a computer, everything is either yes or no. And there's nothing in between. Like either you can do something or you can't. And with the fact that you can now talk to things, or it just seems to have an opinion even, or you can have a conversation, this entire paradigm goes away, right? Like you can now, it feels a lot more natural to interact with the technology because you don't even necessarily have to type anymore. You can just talk to it. And so going forward, as you mentioned at the beginning of the episode, the list just gets very long. If we imagine that we're starting a new thing, like let's say we're building a new website where people can buy a product. What would you say? Like if you said people come to you and ask, Steffi, do you think we can make this? And you also mentioned that it's, that compliance more often than not is just an aftermath and it's considered way too late. And then it just jeopardizes the whole timeline of a project. So do you have an idea of how we could get to the integrate earlier and have these conversations at the points in time where we could avert the chaos in the end? Like what are the most important questions to ask in the beginning to when you would like to be included in the design of something, so you don't, from your perspective, don't have the fear that crucial questions are going to be neglected, which just mean consequences at the very end of the project?
Yeah, I think the most important question still will never become any less important, not now, not in the future, is what data are you going to collect and for what purpose? With who are you going to share it? So it's just a personal data question. Remains the personal data question forever and ever. And that will be the same for if you're designing the tool with or without AI. So we're using an AI tool. Is the AI tool then collecting personal data or not?
Yeah.
With who are we sharing the personal data? So the whole point of why I went more into AI is not because, it's a new thing that is out there and I'm interested, because I do have a bit of interest, of course, to understand what everyone's working on and what everyone was giggling about. But I understood that business is blowing up on AI and wants to design their own AI or using their big AI tools. If I'm the one in charge of personal data protection in your company, I need to understand, all right, so what AI tools do you want to use and what is that AI tool collecting then for you? How are they processing it? If you connect it with your tools and you let a user enter their name and email, is that AI, is it going to stay in the AI? Is it possible that someone with, hijacking prompts can obtain those type of emails? I mean, this is not new information that this can happen. So what are then security measures? What are we doing? What's the policy around it? So in the beginning of any new feature, website, things that you do, I think it becomes now with all of these new regulations, more and more important that you don't have a legal department far away, but you have someone accessible, quick to answers, maybe some bullet point checklist and prompts to know, like, okay, we want to build, even if it's an internal button or feature. Imagine a feature creep. You want to have as many as you want, as you can design. Whatever, it doesn't matter. All good. You need to know in your business what you can do, what is like, what has, someone researched from your legal department that you can do with the contracts that have been signed, with the framework that has been set up in your organization. What can you do? What data is going to be collected? For what purpose? With who is it sharing with? Because if you fail in one of these points, your data is not going to be an asset. It's going to be a loss. All of it's going to be a loss because you will not be able to obtain the data. You will not be able to share the data how you've envisioned it. So all you have is a feature you can use.
Maybe also a creature. Depends on what you're building.
Who knows? Yeah. So that way, I think becomes, and coming back to your point that do I still have a job as a UX designer? Honestly, I think this era is super interesting for you guys, especially because, as you said, maybe we don't use forms for the buttons anymore.
Exactly.
Maybe I design something with wink, wink, wink. You're gonna
Totally.
Which means lawyers and designers need to work together because you want to design something. And I say, okay, it cannot be deceptive of a dark pattern or how's the data obtained. So what does this wink say, yes or no? And it's going to be really interesting. I think the world is
Exactly.
opening up for new opportunities and collaborations and job changes and
Yeah.
creativity.
So I think a trend that we've seen in software development in the last years that has nothing to do with AI really, um, was that like 10 years ago we had this way of organizing the development of software where you had a department with all of the coding people and all of the engineers, and they were like all stuck together in one team. And then on another floor, you had all of the designers, and they were happily designing all together and were being super brilliant in themselves. And then we had the product manager who sort of had to work with both people, and it was like everything was like a waterfall. Like there was an idea, somebody wrote down the idea into a user story, and then they kind of asked the designers to look at the user story and make something out of this, like make an app now, that make a design that we can see how this would go. And then those designs would kind of at the very last step before it got rolled out be kind of dropped into the development department. So they were at the very end of the process. Like I think if you were anywhere near building digital products or websites, you know what I'm talking about. This is just the way that it always was. And
And in
we've
some companies still.
and some companies still do this. Absolutely. What we've seen over the last years is that this waterfall is being broken up to just be less of a waterfall. Like people call this the hot potato method or like interdisciplinary teams or however you want to call this. But the fact that you're describing as well now is that making software is just much more now than design and code. Like they still require design and code, but the design, like they require so much more than that. Like it's just the pool of skills that you sort of have to fill to be successful at this endeavor is just increasing. And so what a lot of organizations did in consequence is that they just reorganized their entire team structure to not just have like a team of developers here and a team of designers here and a team of legal people there, but that they, for a certain project, stuck the teams together to have all of the skills in one team that you would need to make the entire thing. And when they're done with that, they kind of reorganize the team to make the next thing for whatever is needed in that project. And so to me, it sounds like representatives of the legal team, at least, should be in these teams. Like they should just be part of the project. Right? Because
I agree.
otherwise there's no way to work together. Like, or it will just be horribly inefficient to ping pong between all of these departments who each of them have their own timeline of the thing that they're working on. So everybody's just disrupting everyone constantly if they're not on the same project. Right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I have indeed experienced this where you're coming in a bit too late, realized, and then the whole team realized, oops, we actually don't really know the legal framework we're working with. And then I work over the top to make sure we get this. And then, yeah, there's a lot of fixes then
Yeah.
to be done. Quick documentation. Nothing is very pretty. It doesn't need to be pretty. It needs to be correct. That's fine. But a bit more thought and time was usually appreciated. It's and it can happen still, of course. That's why you have emergency time scheduled, always available on your agenda. At least you try to, for really urgent things or ad
Yeah.
hoc things, of course, sure. But yeah, I think we're getting into this phase where, yeah, things need to, in the end, same as, I really like this approach with where you have projects for features and where compliance or legal is part of it rather than sending an email. This team has designed this. What do you think, compliance and legal? Because if you're not part of the discussions with compliance and legal, you miss out on a lot of thought behind it from designers and sellers and market research of why things are
Yes.
being decided or why things are discussed. Because, for example, if you have a type of target where, things are, a certain consent is difficult because of a disability or because of their children or their parents, there's maybe there are reasons why certain features are chosen and not others. So when you go then to compliance, you explain why,
That
but
too.
you're not part of the
Absolutely.
thought process, which means you're maybe lacking in your assessment. And it just helps you also when you're documenting a conclusion from an assessment.
Yeah.
What's the thought process behind it? So that's also what authorities wish to see. So I think from all aspects, it would be a win-win situation if compliance and legal or legal are part of it. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
totally.
completely with you. Another thing, though, another point that you mentioned about will AI take over all of these things? And I still also think no, because AI is actually the most useful for the experts on your own field. Like, best, you already had that education and experience, and AI can only get so much information and make so many conclusions drawn from all of its information and training data. But what you're looking for and what's important, and you want to shape it in a certain thought, or you want to get more ideas and more different scenarios. Sure, it can come up with that because
Yeah.
you ask the right things.
Yes.
If you don't know your, like, anyway, if anyone that has no idea asks about a feature, like, oh, let me check with ChatGPT what's the GDPR framework on this, I guarantee you, it will give you a general assessment, like, look at the consent if the consent is properly asked.
Yeah.
If you're collecting personal data, make sure that you do not have more data than necessary for the data minimization principle. It will give you just the overall general principles. It
Yes.
will not give you what it will not give you, and that's still why you need a human. Like, this is correct, and now looking at this specific situation, maybe your legal basis can be this or that, etc. So it's like,
It's
we need.
exactly. You just have to also you have to ask the right questions, and you got to know what you're looking for, and then you
Yes.
can use AI to be faster, maybe,
Yeah.
or to get more output done, or to work on less tedious things that you had to do before. But you still got to know what you're doing, right?
Yeah.
Um,
I
and
use it a
also,
lot because I know exactly what I look for, and I want the specific source that I know I read somewhere. Give it to me.
yes, yes, same with
I want
me.
a case that said exactly this and this and this. Where is that case? Give me 3 sources that is the case, because it always never gives me the right exact case. It gives me 3 cases where this was decided and this, and another few cases, and then I go into the case to check exactly what I was looking for. It gives you, yeah, it's just a really great Google with more.
Exactly. Yeah, the same when we're programming, even when we're designing now, that if you're describing the problem properly, then it can help. And otherwise it just generates like vague weirdness. Um, and yeah, and so I think what's important to understand, like that I also didn't understand too well until recently, is that to involve the legal department doesn't mean you ask like one question and you get one answer and then you're golden or you're not or whatever. But as with any other skill that goes into making a project successful, it's a collaboration, it's a back and forth, it's like one topic influencing the other topic and vice versa, right? Like it's really, I know it sounds a bit chaotic, I guess, like for people coming out of the organizational paradigm of, we have one pile of people here that can do this thing and the others over here, and like the communication between them, we can, facilitate that and whatever. And so I think if you come along and say, get someone from each of those teams, chuck them all together, and let them have like a wild party to make a good software feature sounds crazy. But on the other hand, they will have so much interaction that needs, in fact, to be facilitated so that everyone understands what they're doing, that maybe it's just better to have them a lot closer together. So they get to work with each other and also see the other perspective. Like that's a topic that everyone knows who know me is I'm very passionate about, is how designers and developers can work together, because I think in the end they're making the same thing, they just call it differently. So
Yeah.
yeah.
It's I think definitely for lawyers and compliance people, they need to step out of their looking at everything from a legal framework, but they need to start working from being part of this feature or design team, right? Like, okay, we're designing something. We are part of this team. We're part of this company, and we are trying to design something. And my part, where this guy is like looking at all the customer features and the customer answers and market research, this guy is looking at what is engineering technically possible, what is from a design point, how does it feel for a user to be even using this from both and back and forth. And then there's a compliance person like, okay, in what legal framework are we doing this? And can we use everything that we ask? Can we ask everything? Can we use everything? Can we share everything that we want?
Yes.
So in the end, they are not, it's not anymore. I think we have to shift from not anymore a person that's outside answering questions. I'm also guilty of that, but we need to be more part of the entire core business of like, okay, we are building this. What are we doing?
Oh, but
What's the idea?
that's a very interesting perspective. Like I just before we started to talk about this podcast, just because I know how you work and what you do and so on, I always saw it as, oh, we as the people who make software have to include legal more. But what you're saying is also that people in the field of being lawyers and somehow related to legal topics also have to step out of their box.
Completely.
Yeah.
You need to get into the field and don't wait anymore for people to come to you to ask, can I do this? Yes or no. If you want people to come to you, you need to be there first to them. Ask what they're doing. What are they working on? What's going on? Look in the Slack channel, in all of the channels, what's going on with people that they are, what's being posted of features or things or ideas or in the random chat or just being part of it.
How are they thinking, right? And I think this is a very valuable bridge to build in both directions, because I know, since we know each other, that I have a lot better grasp of how lawyers and legal folks in general even think about something. Like that alone was like a completely closed box for me before. Like it's like I just didn't understand, Like I
don't think I made it any clearer, but
no, absolutely. Like for me, for example, like I was under the impression that laws can always be answered with a yes or no. It's like a binary instruction set, which is just not right.
Which is the whole point, right?
Yeah, exactly. So
yeah. It's like my words need to fit on the paper and it needs to convince, someone that what it says makes sense and that in the practice we're doing what we say we are doing. So somehow everything needs to work together, and that's very challenging.
Very challenging, absolutely. But I think, I think this is a beautiful notion to end this podcast episode, at least, that many things become more integrated, and the legal side of stuff just has to be part of that. Like I think, as we saw over the last years, things became a lot more integrated, and everything is a process. And I do believe that in the next years to come, we will have to get better at this if we want to be effective and on point with whatever we're making. Otherwise, will just end up in a gigantic chaos of cleanup, basically, which will also just deteriorate the quality of your product in the end because you're trying to fix everything after the fact. Right?
Yeah. Yeah. Correct. Yeah.
Awesome.
Nice.
Steffi, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate you taking the time to explain and to trying to understand the other people's sides, all of this, because yeah, as we just said, I think that's the way to go forward. And I'm looking forward to our projects together. And maybe we can pick up on this topic in a couple of weeks to share what sort of progress we made and if we had any experiences.
Looking forward to it. Yeah.
Awesome. All right. See you,
Thank you.
everyone. Thank you for listening and see you on the next one. Bye.
Bye.